My hands were shaking before I even unlocked my phone. Not because of the cold, it was mid-July in Phoenix, and the air outside my sister's house was thick and heavy. I was shaking because something felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't name, but your body already knows. I'm about to tell you something I haven't fully said out loud until now. And before I do, can you drop a comment telling me where you're watching from? It genuinely helps me keep going when I know someone out there is listening. My name is Caleb. I'm 31 years old. I work in IT infrastructure for a mid-sized logistics company, and for the past 4 years, I've been building something quietly. No flashy purchases, no vacations, no new car, just a number in a savings account that I watched grow the way you'd watch a garden. Slowly, carefully, with a lot of patience. That number was $74,000. It represented a down payment on a house, my first real stake in a future that was entirely mine. My sister's name is Dana. She's 35. She's always been the one our parents called the responsible one, which I used to find funny because I was the one who never missed a bill, never asked for a loan, never showed up at Thanksgiving needing to borrow gas money. But Dana was older, Dana was louder, and in my family, volume has always been confused with credibility. Her husband's name is Marcus. I want to be fair about Marcus because he's not a villain in the dramatic sense. He's just a man who has spent 12 years doing whatever Dana told him to do. And somewhere along the way, he stopped being a person and became an extension of her decisions. I don't say that with contempt. I say it because it matters later. The weekend everything broke open started on a Friday. Dana had invited the family over for what she called a reunion cookout. My parents drove in from Tucson. My uncle and his wife came from Albuquerque. I drove 20 minutes from my apartment and brought 2 cases of drinks and a tray of food I spent 2 hours making because that's the kind of person I am. I show up, I contribute, I don't arrive empty-handed. The afternoon was fine. It was actually good for a while. My dad was in a rare mood where he laughed easily and told old stories. My mom kept squeezing my arm the way she does when she's proud of you for something she can't quite articulate. I felt, for a few hours, like the version of my family that I used to believe in before adulthood started showing me the cracks. I had 2 beers over 4 hours. I want to be clear about that. 2. I know my limits, and I was driving home later, so I was careful. But somewhere around 8 in the evening, I started feeling a weight behind my eyes that didn't match what I'd drunk. The edges of conversation went soft. I remember sitting in a lawn chair and thinking I just needed a minute, and then I remember nothing. I woke up in Dana's guest room. The ceiling fan was spinning slowly. My shoes were off. My jacket was folded on the chair in the corner. My phone was on the nightstand, and my bag was on the floor beside the bed, zipped up like someone had been careful about it. I remember thinking that was thoughtful. I remember thinking Dana had put me to bed because I'd had too much to drink. I didn't question it that morning. I felt groggy and embarrassed, and I thanked Dana for letting me sleep over, and I drove home in the early light, and I didn't check my phone until I was sitting in my parking lot with the engine off. The notification was from my bank. A transfer alert. I opened it the way you open something you're not really worried about, with one thumb, half paying attention. And then I read the number and I read it again, and I sat in that car for 4 minutes without moving. $68,000. Moved in 3 transactions between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. to an external account I did not recognize. I want to tell you what that feels like, because I don't think there's a word for it exactly. It's not panic right away. Panic comes later. The first thing is a very specific kind of stillness, like your brain is refusing to process the information because processing it would mean it's real. I just sat there. I could hear my own breathing. Outside, a neighbor was walking a dog, and the dog was pulling at the leash, and everything was completely ordinary, and I had just lost 4 years of my life. I called the bank first. I was on hold for 11 minutes. When I got through, I gave them every piece of information they asked for, and the representative confirmed the transfers, confirmed the timestamps, and flagged the account for investigation. She told me the transfers had been authorized using my mobile banking credentials and confirmed with a one-time passcode sent to my phone number. I asked her if there was any way to reverse it immediately. She said she was escalating the case, but that I needed to understand it could take time. After I hung up, I sat with that for a moment. Authorized using my credentials. Confirmed with the passcode sent to my phone. My phone, which had been on that nightstand in Dana's guest room while I was unconscious. I went back inside my apartment and I sat at my desk and I opened my laptop and I looked at the transaction log in full. 3 transfers, $25,000 and $25,000 and set cents. Each one spaced 40 minutes apart. Each one confirmed the receiving account had a name on the memo line that someone had been careless enough to leave there. It said DM Renovation Fund. Dana's initials are DM. Dana Marie. I didn't call her that day. I know that might seem strange, but I've learned something about myself over the years, which is that when I'm in the middle of something that could go very wrong, I need to be cold before I can be smart. Hot people make mistakes. I've seen it. I've done it myself when I was younger. So I spent the rest of that Saturday being very, very cold. I called a friend of mine named Trevor who works in cybersecurity. I explained what happened without using Dana's name. He walked me through what I needed to document. Screenshots of every transaction. The full bank log. The timestamps matched against my location data, which my phone keeps running in the background. He told me to pull the location history from my phone for that evening, which I did, and what I found was exactly what I expected and exactly what turned my stomach. My phone had been stationary at Dana's address from 10:47 p.m. to 1:23 a.m. I had been unconscious. My phone had not moved. Someone had used it while it sat on that nightstand. Trevor also said something that I wrote down because I knew I'd need it later. He said, whoever did this was counting on you being too embarrassed or too family loyal to report it. They were counting on you to handle it quietly. Don't. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept running the timeline. I kept thinking about the beer I'd barely touched. I kept thinking about how heavy my eyes had felt by 8 o'clock. I thought about the fact that my bag had been zipped up carefully, like someone had gone through it and then been considerate enough to close it again. I thought about the passcode texts arriving on my phone while it sat in that room, and I thought about someone reading them off the screen in the dark. Sunday morning, I got up at 6, made coffee, and drove back to Dana's house. She opened the door in a robe with a coffee cup in her hand, and she smiled at me like everything was normal. Marcus was somewhere in the back. I could hear the TV. I said, I need to talk to you about my bank account. And here's the thing, I'll never forget. For just half a second, maybe less, her eyes went somewhere that wasn't surprise. It wasn't the look of someone hearing unexpected news. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for a conversation and was recalibrating how to have it. I thought about that half second 100 times since then. It was the tell she didn't mean to give me. She said, what about it? I told her the amount. I told her the timestamps. I told her about the memo line. She put her coffee cup down on the little table by the door, and she crossed her arms and she said, Caleb, you were drunk. You needed help. You had that money just sitting there, and we are genuinely struggling right now, and I didn't think you'd even notice for a while. I want you to read that again. She said she didn't think I'd notice. She didn't deny it. She didn't pretend she didn't know what I was talking about. She explained it. She justified it. She stood in her doorway in her robe and she told me that I was the kind of person who could afford to absorb the loss, and they were the kind of people who needed it. I asked her if she'd put something in my drink. She said, don't be dramatic. I said, that's not an answer. She said, you had a lot to drink and you got tired and we were just trying to help you. I asked where the money was. She said it had already been allocated, some of it for the kitchen remodel they'd had quoted, some of it toward a debt Marcus had been carrying. The rest, she didn't specify. I said, Dana, I'm going to give you until Monday morning to transfer it back. Every dollar. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, a real one. And she said, and if I don't? I said, then I'll let the bank investigation and the police sort it out. She stopped laughing. Marcus appeared in the hallway behind her, and I could see from his face that he hadn't fully understood what was happening until that moment. He looked at Dana. She didn't look back at him. I drove home and I wrote everything down in a document. Every detail I could remember from Friday evening, the timeline, what I ate and drank, what time I started feeling off, what time I woke up, the bank log, the location data, the memo line. I saved it in 3 places. I emailed it to myself. I sent a copy to Trevor. Monday came. Nothing was transferred back. Monday afternoon, I filed a police report. The officer who took it was thorough, and he didn't seem surprised, which I found both reassuring and quietly devastating. He told me that financial fraud within families was more common than most people would want to believe, and that the documentation I had was strong. He flagged the possible drugging as a separate and serious matter and said a detective would likely follow up. I also called my parents that evening. I told them exactly what happened. I didn't ask them to take sides. I didn't frame it as a fight. I laid out the facts the same way I'd laid them out in that document, calmly and in order, and I let them sit with it. My mother was silent for a long time. Then she said, "There must be some misunderstanding." My father said, "Dana wouldn't do something like that." I said, "Dad, she told me she did it." She explained her reasons to my face. He said, "You must have misunderstood her." That was the moment the grief hit, not the money. I know that sounds strange, but I had already started mentally detaching from the $68,000 the moment Trevor told me to think like a case and not a victim. What I hadn't detached from was the idea that my parents would hear this and believe me. That was the loss I hadn't prepared for. Sitting in my apartment on a Monday night, hearing my father tell me I had misunderstood my own experience, that was the thing that actually broke something. I said goodnight and I hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned what it means to be right and alone at the same time. Dana called my uncle. She told him I was having some kind of breakdown, that I'd always been jealous of her stability, that the story I was telling was a distortion of something that had been a genuine misunderstanding about a loan I had offered and then retracted. My uncle called me and led with the version Dana had already given him, and when I presented the documentation, he said he didn't want to get involved in family drama. My mother texted me 3 times asking me to drop it before I destroyed the family over money. I want to pause there for a moment, because that phrase, destroy the family over money, is one that I've turned over and over in the weeks since, as if I were the one who had done the destroying, as if the destruction weren't already done by someone else on a Friday night while I was unconscious in a guest room. The detective followed up in the 3rd week. She was careful and specific, and she had clearly done her research. She asked me to come in and I brought the full documentation. She confirmed that the bank had flagged the transactions and that the investigation had identified the receiving account as belonging to a joint account held by Dana and Marcus. She said the case was moving forward and that the drugging allegation was being taken seriously, and that depending on the toxicology, she paused and said there were limitations given the time elapsed. The charges could include something beyond simple theft. Dana retained a lawyer at some point in week 4. I know because her lawyer sent me a letter offering to settle for $40,000, barely half of what was taken, in exchange for my agreement to withdraw from the criminal process. I read that letter twice and then I set it aside and I called the detective and told her about it. She said that was not an unusual move and to let my own attorney handle any communication going forward. I had hired an attorney by then. Her name is Rachel, and she has the kind of quiet intensity that makes you feel like you're in good hands. She told me the civil case was very strong given the documentation and the bank's cooperation. She told me the criminal process was separate and not something I could or should try to control. She told me to stop answering calls from family members who were acting as intermediaries for Dana, which I did. The civil case settled 7 months later. I will not tell you the exact number, but I will tell you it was more than $68,000. Dana's attorney tried twice more to negotiate downward, and both times Rachel held firm, and both times they came back. There was no courtroom moment. There was a document and signatures and a wire transfer that landed on a Thursday afternoon while I was eating lunch at my desk. The criminal case is still working through the system. I have been advised not to discuss the specifics. What I can tell you is that I no longer speak to Dana. I don't think I ever will again. Marcus sent me a message about 8 months in, separate from Dana. And it was brief, and it didn't contain an apology exactly, but it contained something that read like a person finally understanding what they had participated in. I didn't respond. I'm not sure what I would have said. My parents are a harder question. My mother called me after the civil settlement and said she was glad I got my money back and that she hoped we could move forward. She did not say Dana was wrong. She did not say she was sorry for the weeks she spent asking me to go quiet. I told her I needed more time, and that was honest. My father has not called. I've thought a lot about what I want to say to you if you've stayed with me this long, because I know some of you are in something similar. Maybe not this exact thing, but you know what it feels like to be standing in the rubble of something your family built and holding the evidence in your hands and having the people who were supposed to love you tell you you're holding it wrong. Here's what I know. Documentation is not cold. It's not unloving. Building a record of what happened to you is an act of self-respect. And in some cases, it's the only thing standing between you and the stories someone else writes about you. I kept records not because I'm calculating, but because I've learned that memory without evidence is just a version, and some people will always prefer their version over yours. I also know this. Forgiving someone does not mean reopening the door. I've spent some time with that idea, and it's become something I return to when the anger gets heavy. I don't need Dana to suffer indefinitely for me to move forward. But I also don't need her back in my life to prove I've healed. Those are two separate things, and for a long time I thought they had to happen together. They don't. The $74,000 is mostly rebuilt. I'm at $61,000 now, and I'm on track. The house is still the goal. It got delayed by a year, maybe a little more, but it's still there on the other side of this, and I can see it clearly. If you've been carrying something like this, something you've been told is too messy to talk about, too family to report, too complicated to take seriously, I want you to know that it's not. Theft is theft. Betrayal is betrayal. And the fact that it came from someone at your table on a summer evening makes it more painful, not less serious. Thank you for sitting with me through this. If this story reached you in some way, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. Only if you feel like this is a place worth coming back to. I'll be here.